Welcome, guys. Welcome to another episode of Blacksploit. I am your host, Kayode Howard. Guys, we have changed the format a little bit. We're still filming. We still got some video, but we are putting this and filming this, also doing a podcast. We are podcasting this out. You'll be able to find us on Anchor Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and we're filming here at LMC TV. So thank you and welcome. I'd like to welcome my guest. I got a guest today. Cassandra Turner, a.k.a. Auntie, but I can't tell you the rest, but Auntie.
Because if he tells you, he's have to kill you.
Yes, I cannot tell you the rest. She's my special guest, so welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really, really excited.
So listen, you really gave me a good one this time. This was a recommendation by my aunt, and I must say, I finally got to watch it. I watched it yesterday. And it was fascinating. I got to watch the Spook Who Sat by the Door.
Amazing movie, right?
Fantastic movie, man. Amazing. Like this was 1973, mm-hmm. And I didn't know what to expect from it because before I watched it, I didn't read anything about it.
Right.
I was like, okay, I'm gonna go in there and just go for it.
Right.
After watching it. And getting 10 minutes in, I'm like, okay, all right, this is good. This is good. And then they just started with all the content, the story, mm-hmm. The narrative was just
amazing.
Yeah,
definitely.
And how it spoke to a lot of stuff going on.
Relevancy.
Today.
Yeah.
So first off, let's talk about one thing I want to talk about first is the character. Okay. Right? The main mm-hmm. character. Lawrence Cook.
Yes.
He played Dan Freeman.
Tell
me a little bit about him first before.
Dan Freeman, who's Lawrence Cook, who plays Dan Freeman. Yeah. He's part of a CIA. So the CIA wanted to integrate.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
They were like, we've got to integrate. So we're going to try to find one black man who could be in the CIA, and there was a class of, maybe 30, it went down to 10, it went down to 6, and there was one left, and that one was Dan Freeman. And he is pretty much the driving force behind this movie, The Spook Who Sat by the Door.
Yeah.
And he ended up being the only one in the graduating class of African Americans in the CIA, and he worked there for 5 years, and you got to watch it.
Now, he worked there. Okay, so he worked there for 5 years.
I'm
going to spoil it all.
All right.
People are just going to have to, you're just going to have to watch and for yourself. He works there for 5 years.
5 years.
And it's very clever because I didn't read anything about it, so I didn't know what his plan was.
Right.
He plans to take all the information he's learning from the CIA.
And bring it
to
the hood. Exactly.
And then start to mold and build warriors and fighters.
Freedom fighters.
Yes. For liberation of freedom and to create his own colony, he mentioned.
Yeah.
Take back what's theirs from the white man. Like
right.
It was
deeper
powerful.
And it was more. It was extremely provocative.
Yeah.
It was riveting, and it was so much deeper than the title. You look at the title, you're like, The Spook That Sat by the Door, and you're like, mm-hmm. I don't know if I want to see that.
Right.
And you think you're going for entertainment purposes, right. And that is not what you get.
No.
You get a provocative, like seriously insightful, just deep picture that really has so much relevancy today.
Yeah.
And you're really surprised about the outcome and how it ends up playing out. So
right. It was a really cool action crime caper type of movie too,
right? It was definitely that. Yes.
Like it had those elements too where it seemed as if it almost seemed like a Mission Impossible type of thing. He's got, he's planning out. He needs money,
right?
So they rob a bank.
They rob a bank,
right? They need weapons.
Yep. So they rob
I think it was like
the army.
The army.
How do you rob the army?
He robbed the army
and got military supplies.
Got
$300,000 from the bank.
$300,000 from the bank, and in 1973.
That's like $300 million right now. That's a lot of money. Yeah.
So the plan to do this was from beginning to end,
Mm-hmm.
it had you. It sucked you in. It sucked me in.
It really did.
Right.
Yes, it did.
And one of the things about the characters I wanted to bring up with Dan Freeman,
Mm-hmm.
who played by Lawrence Cook, and J.A. Preston Dawson, his boy. That was his boy, who was a cop
Yep.
in the film.
He wanted him to be a double agent.
Wanted him to be a double
He
agent.
wanted him to be a double agent.
Now, what I found interesting by this was I kind of got similarities of Dr. King
And Malcolm
X.
Absolutely.
So they had a conversation in the car that was really like one non-violent and one versus violent.
Right.
Thought that was fascinating.
And the interesting thing is that Dan Freeman was always that revolutionary kind of guy.
Yeah.
And, Dawson's like, this is what you sounded like in college because he's back to that radical place.
Right.
But he was always in that radical place. He had a plan from the beginning. He knew that he was gonna get that job. He knew he was gonna infiltrate, and he knew what his plan was from the beginning.
Did.
He absolutely did. I think even in college, he kind of knew that this was going to be his destiny. He may not have known the road that he was going to take, but he knew that his destiny was going to be to get some freedom fighters, to have a black revolution, because he'd always been that person in college to speak like about that radicalism and racism and just trying to take back what belongs to you, take back your freedom, because that's all he wanted. He wanted his freedom.
And that's what, and you definitely see that. I mean, as his character starts to develop, from beginning, you don't know what his plan is, but it's really good development of character as well, because you see the steady progression into this militant soldier in a way, like this militant man who's educated, who is well trained, physically fit.
Yes,
the man was. He was the embodiment of what this revolution was going to be about.
Absolutely.
So it was just a great progression of character
and
story.
Because even when you first meet him,
and
even the scene in there at it's after they've had some sort of training and they're all drinking and he's in the background, not saying a word.
Exactly.
And that is poignant when you think about character development and where he comes from. Because what happens is you're the one they're watching. He's the one they ended up watching because he was like never out there. So what was up with that,
See, so good.
It really is.
I really, really enjoyed it. I thought this... Man, I thought this should be taught in like film class.
It
you know
really
what I'm saying?
should.
Like it was so... Because especially, I guess what we're dealing with today...
Right.
Because it speaks to so many things. When we're going to get to it in a minute, from politics to poverty to inner city to crime to racism,
Absolutely.
It was just into the black man as a whole, what people saw him as versus what he really is. Right.
So it's that perception.
Absolutely. And
I
found it. I love films that kind of with the white characters, right? They do this thing where they make them so oblivious to that there's a black man who happens to just be educated.
Right.
They're like, what do you mean? Like they're just so surprised that he was more than that.
Right.
It was it's a satire, so they're making fun of like how people were thinking at that time.
He should just be an athlete.
Right, that's what they kept saying.
He should only be an athlete. He should only, he was doing well in everything. He was doing well in the academics, and then they were like, well, he's not going to do well in the sports. They don't do that. Either you can do well in academics or you don't. Yeah. He excelled in everything. And then found out he went to college on an athletic scholarship. So the man was intelligent and he was an athlete. He knocked it out knocked that right out the park.
Yeah. Now the story we talked about a little bit, but the story and the meaning of this film, right? I was reading some things on it, and first off, the title itself, right? Spook, racial slur back in the day, right? Sat by the door, which I read, which is interesting because I never knew this, was when they were integrating in government jobs and all that stuff. They would place the black person or the black man or black woman by the front,
Right.
right? To be seen.
To be seen.
right?
Exactly.
To prove that there was some type of
Integration.
Hey guys, this is what we're doing. Like,
Because
hey,
even if you'll see his
know?
boss, that was what he decided. Well, we'll put him in reception. Everybody
in-
can see we're integrated.
Exactly.
But the word spook, there is that negative connotation to it, which is also the meaning of a spy.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So it had that double meaning.
It had that
you
double
know?
meaning.
So-
It was really good. That double meaning played a lot for this. Now the story itself being so there was one in the cultural significance. One of them, right, from education. They were talking high in one scene. He's in the neighborhood in Chicago,
Yep.
and he's talking to all the guys around there, talking about the importance of education.
Of getting an education.
Right?
Yes.
That to me was important to see on screen, but it's also showing the give back to the community in
Yep.
a way, right?
They're paying it forward.
Paying it forward. Like the guy has his education, he's going back and teaching everybody what to
Go
do,
get an
how to,
education.
what to do, how to do it,
Absolutely.
and things like that. Thought that was great. Right?
It was great.
Then we get into the poverty of the area, right?
Right.
We see the inner city. We see the dichotomy. We see, of course, your white officials who are living the life and all that stuff, and then you see the blacks who are in inner city struggling.
Right.
You see that clearly,
Right,
right?
clearly.
The poverty.
Yeah.
So now he's trying to get them out of that.
Right, and he's tying it all together. He's
tying it all
He's
together.
letting you know that without getting an education, this is where you're going to be.
Right.
And if you remember the scene where he's talking to Shorty's mother in the cafeteria, he goes to the
yeah.
cafeteria and
Yes.
he's talking to Shorty's mother, and you'll know that. Well, if you watch the movie, you'll know who Shorty is. But he's talking to Shorty's mother, and he's asking, "Hey, what's up with Shorty?" And she said, "Oh, he's working. He's got a great job." And she, she's like, he's like, got a job. He's still hustling. You know, what are you talking about? Isn't he getting high? Oh, he only has a $30 a week habit. But then he sees Short. He's asking her, "Why doesn't he go to school? What about school?" "Oh, he doesn't do school." So when he sees Short, he happened to see Shorty in the street. And he was like, "Yo, man, when are you gonna get off these streets? What happened? You're gonna let these streets kill you? You can't support your family like this forever, because what if something happens to you? Then what are they gonna do?" You
And the
see?
importance of taking care of your family, making sure your family's taken. And how are you, if you're the provider, the man of the house, and you're the person they're relying on, what's going to happen if you're no longer there, right? When you're the person who can possibly get them out
Right.
of that situation.
Right.
What I thought was really interesting that has to do with the cultural significance, politics, right? In the beginning of the film, sets it all up,
Yep.
right? The senator needs votes.
Yes.
And he's losing the Negro vote.
Yes,
he
he's
said,
losing
right?
the Negro vote.
So how can we get that vote back? And he had the black assistant and the white lady who was helping him as well. And she was like, "Well, we can integrate someone into the CIA."
CIA. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it also showed, like, even today, how some of these politicians play to the black vote in a way, or the brown vote, when it comes to promising certain things or making it seem like they're going to help more than they really do.
Right.
So I felt like that was a good scene where the senator's like, "Okay, well
then,
if they know that I'm going to put someone African American in CIA, they'll believe that I'll do it
I'll
more.
do it." Yep.
And then that'll make everyone want to vote for me or get the votes.
Kayode, the interesting thing about that is, this movie was filmed in 1973.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about J. Edgar Hoover
Oh yeah.
and the FBI, there's a correlation there in terms of, integrating the FBI. Bam, now we're integrated. This is the CIA. So there's this movie, and that is what is amazing and riveting about this movie, is because it's so relevant.
Yeah.
And I use that term loosely because it really is relevant. It was relevant in 1973, 83, 93, 2003, 13, and 23. It will be relevant because what it speaks to is the evolution of how the more things change, the more things remain the same.
Yeah. Totally agree. Yes. And that goes for the equal rights.
Yep.
the massive amounts of stereotypes, which was satire as well, right?
Yep.
They threw some satire in there because they want to show you how ridiculous
Absolutely.
the thinking was at this time, and they elevated it to a level 10, of course.
Right.
But it was to show you how crazy that how the thinking was, like the mindset of these people, thinking that they were African Americans or blacks were not good enough
Right.
to be in office
Right.
or higher levels of government
in the
jobs
CIA.
or in the CIA, and we see what happened with that.
Interestingly enough, even so, Dan Freeman,
Yeah,
he placated on those stereotypes a little bit, right?
He did.
He was like, all right, because during the day y'all gonna look like the dope fiends.
Yeah, right.
But at night you're training, you're training guerrilla style, right? Teaching them the steps, everything, it's interesting because when you watch it and you see the comparison from when he's training in the CIA and he's training those young brothers from the streets, if you see, you can't even tell the difference because it's exactly the same.
Yep, couldn't tell the difference.
It's just wow.
Very smart. Now, I wanted to get to one scene, the riot scene, right? Now, that riot scene was very interesting because it all started with the police officers shooting a black man down.
Shorty,
right? I was like, oh damn.
Yep.
This is
today.
flashback or flash forward to like present day.
Yes.
Blew my mind. I'm like, okay, this riot scene was crazy. So now you have a riot scene, black man shot by the police, Shorty.
Unarmed.
And now you have this riot scene, and now you have Dawson, who is a cop, and how he played. His character was interesting because in that scene you saw him conflicted with
He was conflicted. He was torn.
joining the revolution and joining his brothers and sisters, or
Being committed to his blue brother.
And when he took out his gun and he pointed at the other officer and the dog
And the canine.
and said, "Hey, listen, you know how they feel about dogs,
Yes.
right? With the long
Yep.
history, get those dogs out of here." And I think that was a scene where he finally woke up and said, "This is not right."
Right.
But speak a little bit on that scene today, like
Well,
the
I mean,
significance.
the significance is when you think about another unarmed black man being shot by the police, and then there's riots being started. I mean, we think about situations like even Eric Gardner. He wasn't shot by, but he was unarmed and he's dead. And it starts a whole, it just starts a domino effect of recognizing that racism and then the police in and of themselves, like how there's still such a disconnect between the police and the people, especially African Americans, especially the black community.
Right.
There's such a disconnect. And we look at how even down, you go to Rodney King. Rodney King, there's a situation with that, and there's race riots.
Yeah.
It's a constant. It can go on and on. Your Sandra Bland's, your Rodney. It can go on and on. It's just so many unfortunate interactions between the African American community and police officers.
And now, and this was 1973, so we knew the tensions then were already at a sky-high level. And now looking at that in 2019, is there really a difference? I mean, probably not.
No.
I mean, you could say...
I would say no.
No, right? So when the controversy with the film that it created with the race riots, right? I guess the race. When was there a time frame?
Well,
with certain riots.
So you have we can start in the 60s.
Yeah.
So we can start in the 60s because as you alluded to earlier with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, right? We can start in the 60s where there were race riots, with Martin Luther King maintaining peace, the March at Montgomery, all of those things where innocent people were killed by whom?
Yeah.
Police officers, law enforcement. Why? Because someone was starting a revolution.
Yeah.
You know, Martin Luther King started a revolution, but his revolution was by using peace, you know, and it still wasn't good enough because what happens is the oppression is what drove freemen. And once again, you want to be free. Martin Luther King wanted to be free. Whenever you have these riots, they speak to saying, we just want our freedom. And we don't know, we're so trapped that there's no way to really get free. And there's a scene in the movie where Freeman says, you can't go to a fight with a brick when the other person has a gun.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
You're going to lose.
You're going to lose.
So he wanted to teach his people how to win.
Yeah.
And it may not be right in somebody's head, but it's not right to have to feel that way in the first place.
And in his eyes, if that meant arming his people and taking lives to make it better for his people and to get what's rightfully theirs and to live life equal and not having to worry about certain things and civil liberties that others don't have to worry about it, then that's the path he's going to take.
Right.
It was black militant at its finest.
At its finest.
I don't think I've ever seen an older movie like this where it spoke so much to that. And to me, watching it, I looked at it as a positive thing. Like I didn't look at this as like being a film like damning it.
Right.
I looked at it as a film as celebrating. You're gonna have to fight for what you want.
Yes.
In their case, that's how we did it.
Yep.
Today, obviously,
That's
different time.
Yeah.
You do it a different way,
We're
but
doing
you're
it-
still gonna have to
but we
fight
still fight. Absolutely.
for what you want.
Right.
So it was, you picked a good one. I'm still speechless about it.
It was a great movie.
I was telling Kate, I was like, Kate, this is fascinating. She was like, why'd you watch it without me? I was like, I had to.
It's a great movie. And even
really good.
what's even more poignant about it is he chose the gang that he used to be in. Because you can drive. Listen, you tell some gang members, let's get some guns, they down.
They're right.
Right? They
Exactly.
down.
Yeah.
But now you're taking that mentality and training it. And that's what makes it even more frightening because you're taking that street mentality and training it and disciplining it and arming it at the same time.
Yeah.
So now you're arming and educating somebody who's already fearless.
Right.
Right?
Now, what I found interesting, too, is that he did mention that even if he had to take some of his own brothers
Yep.
down
Yep.
because of this, then that's what he's going to do.
Because he believed.
Because he believed.
Yes.
Right? And he believed that this was a cause that is bigger than all of us. So
Yep.
if you're coming into this and you're going to try to stop the movement, then I'm sorry.
You got to go.
You got to go.
Yep.
Right? This is bigger than all of us.
By
this is
any
bigger than
means
me.
necessary, right?
By any means.
There's that Malcolm X. So
By
there's
any
the
means necessary.
That's.
Did you see a little Dr. King in him?
I saw a little Dr. King in terms of his resilience,
Okay. Okay.
in terms of his perseverance.
Okay.
Because if you compare Dr. King to Malcolm X, those are the two things. They both wanted the same things, but how they achieved it was different. The roads they took were different.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that's life.
Yeah.
That's what happens now, you know? We could both want the same things, but you want it peacefully, and I want to go there and slap the other cheek when you
right.
turn it, right?
Exactly.
So
Now, and I was reading a little bit about this in some historical context. Now, when Dr. King was assassinated, Malcolm X, and then and they talked about how the black community reacted to that. They were outraged, saddened.
Yep.
And then they also mentioned Bobby Kennedy in the same light. And I was like, oh,
so
Bobby Kennedy.
the relevancy to today.
And how upset that African Americans and blacks were upset that their leaders, the people who are fighting for them, and we're so close
Yes.
to making it a world that they have probably never dreamed of it being, we're taking away from them. What do you think about the Bobby Kennedy thing? Like, how do you?
Well, you gotta what you equate it to. So what happens in that time period is that it seemed like there was some person who was white who was giving hope. So you can compare Bobby Kennedy to Bill Clinton.
Oh, Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Bobby Kennedy is our Bill Clinton because he seemed to be for the people. He seemed to be for the African American community when he thought about bills. Now, so what happens is when you think about the Fair Housing Act was enacted back in 1968. There are so many other affirmative action situations that were enacted that caused the white population to say, "What is going on here? How are we allowing these people to actually have equal rights?"
Right.
So it really just Bobby Kennedy, he was today's Bill Clinton. So
he was that beacon of hope.
He was that beacon of hope. Like, okay, we've got because I'm not going to see my face in the White House because that was the mentality. So I've got to look at the person who I think is going to at least try to represent me.
The next best thing that seems to be representing you on a side where he's already in. And his family, brothers, John F. Kennedy. So he has some polls. So there was some real hope that major change was going to come from this. Like major change from JFK to Bobby, that whole family. There was, African Americans saw that and was like, okay, this could be our beacon of hope where we something will happen, something will change from this, right? And then boom, taken away.
Yep.
And I read that article, and it was very interesting to read, like, those were the three people during that time that almost, African Americans are rioting,
right?
Outraged.
Yeah.
I found that very interesting.
It's just an amazing that once again why this movie was just that provocative and that relevant because it really kind of just spoke to the height of what was really happening. This movie takes place in Chicago, and even when we think about Chicago now, Chicago used to be and still is, it had a high crime rate, a lot of guns, gang violence, and it's still today. The interesting thing about this movie is that although it's set in Chicago, because the movie was so provocative, they weren't allowed to film it in Chicago.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
They had to film it in Gary, Indiana.
Gary, Indiana. Wow.
Isn't that great? But what does that tell you? And what that tells you is already somebody knew that this movie was going to be something that was going to start a conversation, and people aren't going to like it. Yeah. The film got shopped as Blacksploit, and when it was released in theaters, it got pulled very soon after.
I can see that. Yeah.
And there were 50 copies of this film disappeared.
Wow.
And the one negative that was left was hidden in a vault under someone else's name, and that's how this movie actually was able to really remanifest itself. Wow. So it's just the controversy behind it is incredible.
Now, Tim Reed, years after, his production company started making copies of DVD and started distributing it. So this was getting out. This was being it was necessary that that this should be seen by people. So I was happy. Listen, I found this on YouTube. That's how. That's how crazy.
That's the whole movie.
I found this on YouTube. The whole movie. I'm like, what? Okay, this is perfect.
Yeah.
Scrolled, and I watched the entire thing there, and it blew my mind.
I was introduced to this movie by someone. They had the DVD. Oh. Believe it or not, he was one of those.
Well, did it have a cover and everything? It
has a cover and everything. Wow. Yeah, Keith, he introduced this movie to me, and I think if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be right here talking about this movie like that. So it was great.
Final thoughts on the film.
I think every African American should see this movie. I think every American should see this movie. I think you should show this movie to your children. Yeah. Because there is a forgotten history that is in that movie. Yeah. That is, our generation doesn't get an opportunity to see it.
That's true.
And, it gives them an opportunity to identify the relevance of what we as a community have gone through and what we will continue to go through. And it makes me think about little Whitey in the show. His name was Big Whitey or what, something like that. And he said, I was born black.
Yeah.
I live black.
Great scene. Yeah.
And I'm probably going to die because I'm black.
Yep. Oh, God.
Wasn't
That's
that
it.
how? That's like,
Yeah.
that says everything.
Yeah.
It says everything for that time, and it's relevant now, but it's a little bit unfortunate that you can still feel that way.
Still.
Because you can still feel that way.
Yep. Yeah. Powerful. I suggest going on YouTube quick and finding it and before they take it down.
Yeah.
Because it's a fantastic film that, like you said, every African American, every American should definitely take time and hour 43 minutes of your time to watch something historical and seeing how it plays today.
Yeah.
With today's conversation, today's cultural references,
Yeah.
from politics to poverty,
Yeah.
inner city to education.
Yeah. It's
Something that needs to be seen.
It's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it. You got to see it.
Gotta see it. Well, guys, thank you for joining me on another episode of Blacksploit. We're here on LMC TV. You can catch us and listen to us, Anchor Podcast. We're on Spotify. You can find us on Apple Podcasts as well, and us other streaming services as well. Both those are our main ones. I'd like to thank my guest, my auntie. I'm calling her auntie. I don't usually call her. I call her something else, but auntie today. But Cassandra Turner, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Catch us next month, guys, on another Blacksploit. We will bring you more great movies, hidden movies that I've probably have never seen before.
There's more to come.
She's gonna help me with those. Take care, guys. Later.